Hello everyone, and welcome to another session of Karen stories from Reddit. In today's video, a self-important Karen gets me barred from her designated parking area, dials the police, and attempts to have my vehicle towed, all while standing on my own private land. She mistakenly believed I was some random person misusing resident parking, when in reality, I am the owner of every single space she was attempting to police. Let's jump into the video. The first story is titled, Karen bans me from a parking lot and calls 911, not knowing I own the whole thing. So, I, a 35-year-old male, reside in a mixed-use community. This setup might be unfamiliar to many, but I find that the blend of zoning types cultivates a really dynamic environment. I own a small commercial strip within this neighborhood and live just a block away. This strip includes a small hair salon, a coffee shop, and a UPS store. Behind it, there's a private parking lot intended for the employees and customers of these businesses. I have signs posted stating this and warning of potential towing, a measure I've never actually had to enforce. The lot is for the businesses, not for general overflow parking. Thankfully, most people can read and don't cause any trouble. After business hours, however, I'm not concerned about who uses it, as no one is being inconvenienced by parking there. I'm aware that parking in my neighborhood is quite challenging. I even park one of my own cars in the lot because street parking is almost impossible to find and my garage is primarily used for storage. Consequently, if someone wants to park there after hours to visit a nearby store or leave their car for a few hours at their own risk to see a friend, I don't interfere. I also have signs clarifying that I am not liable for any incidents that may occur if they choose to park in my lot. One evening, I drove into the lot as I usually do. It was after hours, the shops were shut down, and there were only a couple of other cars parked sporadically. I pulled into my regular corner spot and was retrieving some items from my back seat when I heard the heavy, deliberate footsteps of someone approaching. You know the kind, they are meant to be noticed. This was accompanied by that annoyed tongue-clicking sound. I knew, even before turning around, that this was not going to be a pleasant interaction. This Karen, who appeared to be in her mid-40s, had the demeanor of someone who believes they are far more significant than they are, the type who, if given a clipboard, thinks they wield immense authority. She offered no greeting or questions, immediately launching into an angry tirade. She informed me that I was not permitted to park in the lot. Before I could utter a word in my defense, she began a long rant about how the lot was exclusively for residents and their guests, that I was taking advantage, and that she had personally observed me parking there on numerous occasions. Her tone was condescending, as if she were scolding a 4-year-old caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Needless to say, I am not a child, and she is certainly not my mother, thank goodness. I calmly explained to her that the lot was not for residents but was, in fact, a commercial parking area. She was not interested in hearing it. She maintained that she lived in the vicinity, that the businesses didn't require so many parking spaces, and that she had been documenting how often she had seen my car there. She claimed that only half the lot was for the businesses and the remainder was designated for residents. She then proceeded to ask me invasive personal questions while pointing her phone camera at me, my name, my exact address, and so on. On at least 3 occasions, she threatened to report me if she saw my car in what she called the community lot again. She genuinely seemed to believe she possessed some sort of authority over the area. She even gestured to the printed signs, yes, the very signs I had paid for and installed, and told me she could have me towed if I parked there again. I could have informed her that I owned the lot, but that would have required her to pause her monologue long enough for me to speak. It wasn't a conversation. It was a speech she was delivering. Her final ultimatum was that she would summon the police the next time to have me dealt with. With that, she stomped away as if she had just rendered a great public service. I stood there for a moment, contemplating which parallel universe she was inhabiting, because it was clearly not the same one as mine. Several days went by, and I honestly gave her no further thought. People of her ilk typically exhaust themselves after a single dramatic display. I assumed she had fulfilled her need to feel important for 5 minutes and had moved on. I was mistaken. The subsequent incident occurred on a Saturday afternoon. The businesses were open, the lot was crowded, and I had just pulled in to handle some paperwork at the UPS store. I had hardly exited my vehicle when I spotted her again. She had the same rigid posture and the same expression of someone who has just smelled something foul. She was positioned in the middle of the lot with a pen and paper, actively recording people's license plate numbers. It was incredibly unsettling. That's private information. Our eyes met, and she immediately began marching towards me, as if she had been anticipating my arrival. She asked no questions and said nothing. She simply took out her phone and loudly called the police, reporting that someone was trespassing illegally, as opposed to all those perfectly legal trespasses, I suppose. She also informed them that I was depriving residents of parking. I attempted once more to explain that the lot did not belong to them, the neighborhood, or any residential management, but she was indifferent. She created a major scene, proclaiming that she knew the regulations and that I would not get away with my actions. She even provided the police on the phone with my license plate and car details, so I knew I couldn't simply drive away. People were now staring. A few employees from my own businesses were standing in their doorways, observing the spectacle. Some of them knew who I was and were confused as to why someone would be calling the police on me. Most onlookers, realizing it was rather dull, went about their day. It was at this moment I understood that she wholeheartedly believed she had authority here. She wasn't just bluffing. In her mind, she was unequivocally right. She was convinced the parking lot belonged to the neighborhood, and it was her duty to safeguard it. I hope life is pleasant on whatever planet she resides on, though it sounds quite stressful to me. So, I simply stood my ground and waited for the police. If she was determined to escalate the situation, I was prepared to see it through. Perhaps their arrival would finally compel her to listen to what I had to say. The officers arrived more quickly than I anticipated. 2 patrol cars entered the lot, lights flashing but sirens off. Karen seemed to defy the laws of physics by standing even more erect, looking as though she had just won the lottery. She practically accosted them before they had fully exited their vehicles, waving her arms and launching into a theatrical account of how I was a habitual offender who refused to adhere to parking rules. She pointed at me as if identifying a wanted fugitive. Without any context, they managed to quiet her down and ask for a clear explanation. She recounted everything: how I persistently parked in the community lot, left my car overnight, and was being greedy with a resource meant for everyone. I felt a great deal of sympathy for the officers. They appeared bewildered but maintained their professionalism. They requested my information in a calm and courteous manner, simply performing their duties. I complied without any protest, and they inquired if I had legitimate business there. This was my first opportunity to speak without being interrupted by Karen. Me? Actually, I have more than one reason to be here. First, I just came to use the UPS store. I have something to mail. Karen interjected, "Don't believe him. He's always here." I replied, "That's also true. I'm always here. Partly because I own this strip of stores and the parking lot itself. I don't have the original documents with me, but I can show you photos of the deeds and have a couple of the business owners confirm my identity. Since they write their rent checks to me personally." I didn't need to add much more. The officers, not wanting to go through the hassle of verifying everything, glanced at a few photos I had and deemed them sufficient. He seemed irritated, not with me, but with Karen for involving law enforcement in what was clearly not an emergency. All the while, Karen continued to insist that she knew the owner personally and that the lot was solely for residential overflow, despite obviously not knowing my name, my face, or anything about the businesses associated with the lot. She also clearly couldn't read the signs, which I calmly pointed out to the police. Nowhere did they mention neighborhood overflow. When the officers explained the situation to her politely but very firmly, the color drained from her face. She transitioned from confident to confused to offended in about 30 seconds. She tried to backtrack, claiming she was merely trying to keep things orderly, but by then, the officers were already cautioning her that filing false police reports is a serious offense. They instructed her to vacate the lot immediately. And for the first time throughout this whole saga, she complied. After the officers departed, the lot returned to its usual state. Employees went back inside, customers dispersed, and I reparked my car correctly. Karen, however, remained in the vicinity. I would catch glimpses of her pacing on the sidewalk, glaring at the businesses as if they had personally betrayed her. She made no further attempt to approach me, but that was only because the officers had been very explicit that she was to stay off the property unless she had legitimate business there. I thought that would be the end of it, but apparently, Karen wasn't finished making a fool of herself. The following morning, an employee from the salon sent me a video she had recorded from inside the front window. Karen was back, marching through the lot and photographing every car as if she were carrying out a full-scale city inspection. She walked around, checking license plates, scribbling notes, and even filming the ground as if she expected to uncover evidence of a crime embedded in the asphalt. Every few minutes, she would mutter to herself angrily and shake her head. She was now officially trespassing. I chose the petty option and simply forwarded the video to the same officer from the previous day, along with a brief message explaining that she had returned and was once again disturbing the businesses. In the presence of the officer, I formally issued a trespass notice, informing her she was no longer welcome and had to leave immediately. The officers witnessed this and advised her that, having been officially trespassed by the property owner, she would be arrested if she returned for any reason. She attempted to argue, naturally, waving her arms in disbelief, but the officers were no longer interested in her theatrics. They made it clear that this was now a legal issue and she needed to stay away. News traveled quickly. The salon, the coffee shop, and even the UPS store had all had dealings with her at different times without ever knowing who she was or where she came from. Now, they finally understood that she held no authority at all, just an enormous sense of entitlement and an excessive amount of free time. Everyone was now aware that she was the problem, not me. She had lost her imaginary power trip, her ability to harass customers, and any shred of respect she thought she commanded. Best of all, she was now barred from the very lot she had tried so desperately to control. After Karen was officially banned from the property, the neighborhood resumed its usual rhythm. The businesses could operate without the perpetual stress of a self-appointed parking enforcer, and I could finally utilize my own property without the threat of another dramatic showdown. The entire episode had been utterly absurd, but there was a certain gratification in knowing that everything had resolved exactly as it should have. In the end, she managed to get herself banned. I retained my property, my tranquility, and my reputation. It was a minor victory, but sometimes those are the most satisfying. Particularly when they involve watching someone's self-destruction. The next one is an "I do work here" lady story, titled "My face is on the building, but apparently I'm not the owner." I currently own an IT services business that caters to corporate clients. However, several years ago, I also ran a small chain of computer repair shops that accepted walk-in customers. To be clear, I was a very hands-on owner and frequently worked the front counter because I enjoy interacting with customers whenever possible. I believe it's important to stay connected to the challenges the frontline staff face, as they have a much better understanding of the business in some critical respects. I also have a fairly high opinion of myself, so I used to feature my face in all of my advertising, which turned me into a sort of mobile billboard for my business around town. So, one day I'm working the counter at one of my shops when a man I'd never seen before enters. He places his computer on the counter and informs me that it isn't working and that I need to fix it. By the way, guys, if you appreciate these "I do work here" lady stories, which are quite uncommon, please remember to like the video, it helps me out immensely. Also, feel free to let me know where you're watching from today. Anyway, English was his second language, so you can't always assume someone is being rude, sometimes it just comes across that way. Therefore, patience and withholding judgment are crucial. I thanked him for coming in and proceeded to explain our diagnostic fees and how that fee would be applied toward the cost of the repair, all the standard procedures. He instantly flew into a rage. He insisted that he had already paid the fee and the computer was still broken. "Oh no," I responded. "When did you bring it in?" He claimed he couldn't recall but that it wasn't very long ago. So, I checked our computer system and, sure enough, his customer record was there, complete with the serial number of his machine. It had been an entire year since he'd last had that computer serviced. When I explained this to him, pointing out that it had been far too long by any reasonable standard, most new consumer computers come with only a 1-year factory warranty, and his was not new, he launched into another tirade about what a rip-off our business was and how I was obligated to fix his computer because it had never worked correctly after he got it back. I reiterated that it had simply been too long, which set him off, screaming and threatening me. Fortunately, there was a counter separating us. I told him to get out of my store. I used profanity. It wasn't my proudest moment, but profanity is one of my strong suits. He refused to leave, stating that he wouldn't go until I fixed his computer for free and threatened to call the police if necessary. I picked up the phone and dialed the police for him, explaining to the dispatcher that I had a person in my shop who had threatened me and was refusing to leave. The police arrived, and by this point, the man had calmed down slightly and even seemed grateful for their presence. After a brief interview regarding my role and the situation, the responding officer said, "Sorry, the owner wants you to leave, so you're going to have to go." This enraged the man even more, and he started yelling, "He's not the owner. I know the owner. The owner would never treat me this way. He's not the owner." The policeman then stated, "This is the owner. I happen to know that he's the owner." The man continued to argue with the officer, but the officer remained composed and said, "Okay, how about we discuss this outside?" To my astonishment, the man grabbed his computer and went outside with the officer, still ranting about how I had no authority, the officer had no right to eject him, and he demanded to speak to the owner. I could still see and hear them both through the large glass doors as the police officer calmly pointed to the 9-foot-tall retail window on the front of the store. My photo took up 2/3 of the space, with my name and title printed in about 9-inch bold letters beneath my giant, ugly face. The man fell silent, put his computer in his car, got in, and drove off. I never saw him again. I was incredibly relieved that one of my clerks didn't have to handle that situation, but when I shared the story with them, they all wished they had been there to see it. And now, let's proceed to the next story. It begins like this: I am convinced that the people who endure the most from HOAs are not those living within them, but their immediate neighbors. The number of stories I've heard from others who have had issues, albeit to a lesser extent, is staggering. I live adjacent to an HOA, but a single glance at my property makes it obvious that I'm not a part of it. Each home in their community sits on about 1/4 of an acre, whereas my property is just under 2 acres. While some might feel awkward being the odd one out, I relish the fact that I don't have a committee dictating my life or telling me what I can and cannot do. I'm also aware that this particular HOA is one of the notoriously strict, overbearing types, which makes me even more grateful for being just beyond their jurisdiction. I took a summer vacation to Italy with my entire extended family, and we were gone for 2 weeks. I met cousins I never knew I had who lived there and had a wonderful time. I certainly did not anticipate returning home to find anything amiss with my property. In my mind, the worst thing that can happen while you're on vacation is being burglarized. Well, almost my entire backyard had been transformed into a parking lot, and my back fence was nowhere in sight. To be honest, I wasn't using the land for much, but I cherished the trees and the natural environment it offered. I've always been fond of the lyric, "They paved paradise and put up a parking lot," but I never imagined it would happen in my own backyard. Dozens of cars were parked there, and upon closer inspection, I saw signs that explicitly stated things like, HOA residential parking only. They made no effort to conceal their actions. I was livid and immediately marched over to their office to demand an explanation for what could have possibly possessed them to devise such an absurd plan. I was in no mood to be diplomatic or feign politeness after discovering what had been done. We needed more space for cars to park. Not everyone has a driveway, and street parking can be difficult and unsafe. That land was the ideal location for it. Me. It's not your land to use. I didn't consent to renting it to you. Since you've raised the subject of money, we have a bill for you here. A $5,000 assessment fee for the improvements we made to the land. Additionally, you need to begin paying your HOA dues, as we can no longer overlook it. Me, if you believe for a second that I'm giving you a single cent, you are completely delusional. I am not in your HOA, and I would sooner die than be coerced into joining. As for the bill, I don't need to tell you where you can put it, do I? I left, even more incensed that they were attempting to make me pay for the destruction of my own land. I soon received more fines in the mail, alleging that I was non-compliant and including the previous bill they had tried to give me. The total was over $10,000. They even threatened to take me to court and sell my property to collect their money. I retained my own lawyer, went to the town hall, and requested to see the official HOA borders. The documents proved that my property was not within their boundaries, and even if joining them had been my lifelong dream, it wouldn't have been possible. My lawyer then dispatched a cease and desist letter, complete with the proof that I was not part of the HOA. They disregarded it, and more fines continued to arrive at my door. I was also powerless to stop the constant stream of cars parking on my property. Instead of engaging in 30 arguments every day, I installed a camera and attempted to put up private property signs, which the HOA promptly removed. Cars were coming and going 24 hours a day, and there was nothing I could do. I finally reached the point where their persistent disregard for my lawyer's letters allowed me to sue the HOA for trespassing, property damage, loss of land use, and mental anguish. The last claim was due to the stress of having strangers on my property at all hours of the day and even at night while I was trying to sleep. It was unsettling, to say the least. We were suing them for $250,000 in damages to cover the removal of the concrete, the replacement of the grass and trees that were destroyed, and, of course, for punitive damages. I had all the necessary evidence, and both sides knew that the HOA had no legal justification for their actions. They had simply acted and hoped that I would somehow not react. They attempted a counteroffer of just $5,000, with the condition that the parking lot would remain. They were delusional if they thought that offer was in any way fair. It was insulting to be offered so little, and I flatly refused, proceeding to take the matter before a judge. The judge was furious with the HOA and was unwilling to even let them get a word in to present one of their ridiculous lies or excuses. In the end, I was awarded a full amount, despite their complaints. Additionally, they were ordered to cover my legal fees. They would also be responsible for removing the parking lot and restoring the land to its original condition. Many HOAs today have insurance, so I was concerned that they wouldn't actually face any negative consequences for their actions. However, their insurance provider refused to pay the claim because what they had done was illegal. They were forced to pay me out of pocket, leaving them financially strained and facing the wrath of the rest of the HOA community. The residents knew that less money in the HOA's coffers would likely mean the board would overstep its boundaries even more to levy fines for every minor infraction. None of them faced jail time for this, but the fact that they were broke and despised by their community was a fitting punishment. Lacking both money and the confidence of the residents, the entire board was compelled to resign, making way for new, better individuals who actually cared and would not overstep their authority like their predecessors. The only question that remains is how they could have possibly thought this would end well for them. I cannot fathom how they were so foolish as to believe I would simply accept all of this and, on top of everything, hand over the money they demanded. My only theory is that many people are unaware of their rights and are consequently taken advantage of. HOAs might operate under the delusion that they possess extraordinary powers that allow them to do as they please, assuming a judge will automatically side with them over a homeowner. I suspect my HOA believed this, given the amount of times they tried to speak before being cut off by the judge. The judge explicitly told them that in cases of property line violations, the law, by default, will always side with the homeowner whose land has been trespassed upon. Perhaps the hefty sum they had to pay will serve as a lesson to someone that being an HOA does not grant you the right to do whatever you want. Edit. Some people have inquired about where exactly this took place. To avoid disclosing too much personal information, I will just say that this did not occur in the US. However, in my country, there are many affluent communities governed by HOAs, and a lot of them are just as entitled as those found in the United States. And yes, ripe stars, I have to agree, this is something I've noticed recently as well. Many countries have organizations similar to HOAs, though they often go by different names. It seems that no matter where you are, there's always a group of people who enjoy role-playing as petty dictators and collecting fines from you, even when they have no legal authority to do so. I suppose it's a hobby for some people. Anyway, the next one is a pro-revenge story. When our first child was born, my ex-husband forced me to leave my job. When our second child was 2 years old, I discovered his affair. By that time, he had become extremely verbally, emotionally, and occasionally physically abusive. The final straw was when he abused our firstborn. I made him leave. That was in 2012. I couldn't afford daycare to return to work and had no family support. He refused to provide any money for the children's care, stating, "The courts have not ordered me to give you a dime." He lied to the bank, which resulted in my accounts being frozen, and he even assaulted me after I filed for a default in the divorce proceedings. The judge finally ordered him to pay child and spousal support 6 months after I kicked him out. The amount was $2,562 a month. He refused to pay until a wage garnishment was enforced, by which time he was $6,000 behind in support payments. I used this situation to get permission to move away. I remarried a year after the divorce was finalized. I reviewed the court documents and noticed a small box that, if checked, would have terminated spousal support upon remarriage. It was not checked, so I assumed everything was in order. Instead of pursuing a share of his retirement, I simply accepted that year of spousal support, which amounted to $12,000, and left the matter alone. The spousal support was only ordered for a 2-year period. In 2017, he unexpectedly filed for sole custody of the children. It was then that he discovered I had remarried and that he had been paying me spousal support during the first year of my new marriage. I explained to him that I had taken that money in lieu of filing for my portion of his retirement. I told him that if he would let me keep the $12,000, I would not file to split his 401k. He demanded that I repay the spousal support. The judge ordered me to repay it but also increased his child support obligation and deducted the repayment from that amount. The net result was that I received an extra $20 a month, and he essentially repaid himself. He dropped his custody bid in exchange for 2 additional weeks with the children in the summer. I then proceeded with splitting the retirement account. He refused to cooperate and dragged the process out for 4 years. The situation became so contentious that the court sanctioned him, ordering him to pay me $600 a month for a year in addition to child support. He was also charged with contempt. In January 2021, he proposed to his girlfriend. In May 2021, I finally received the disbursement from his 401k. I won't disclose the exact amount, but it was approximately 4 times the spousal support overpayment. I had no idea it would be that substantial. I had anticipated it would be around $12,000, which is why I thought keeping the year of spousal support and not filing for his retirement was a fair exchange. Had he not tried to take the children from me, I would have never filed to split the account. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. By the way, his fiancée emailed me recently, claiming it's my fault he won't marry her because I cleaned out his retirement account. She said I shouldn't have stolen his money. I informed her that I had given him the choice: let me keep the year of spousal support, or take it back and I would file for his retirement. He chose the latter. I told her that if he genuinely wanted to marry her and protect his assets, they could get a prenuptial agreement, so he wouldn't have to worry. She replied that she shouldn't have to sign a prenup because I had robbed him. I never asked to be financially dependent on him. He made it clear that he required a court order to provide for his own children, so I got him one. I tried to be fair by opting for the lesser amount, taking the spousal support and not filing for his retirement. He, however, would not allow it. The next one is a petty revenge story titled, "Seller had my cousin and I drive an hour for a sale, then cancels." I made the seller drive 2 hours for nothing, and my cousin ends up with a big win. About 5 years ago, my cousin, who was stationed at the local air base, decided to come live with us. He enjoys shopping around and claimed that things were cheaper down here. One day, he approached me and asked if I wanted to drive an hour away to pick up a bundle of 12 halves copper wire. I can't recall the exact quantity, but it was more than 15 rolls. At the time, We were working on various small projects around my house and had noticed that the price of materials was steadily increasing. He wanted to buy the wire before it became outrageously expensive, which it eventually did. So, we drove for about an hour, and then the seller texted my cousin to inform him that the deal was off because someone else was paying a higher price. My cousin was furious at this point, and we started the drive back. He asked me to pull over at a convenience store so he could buy a couple of beers. He was initially angry, then just dejected. So, I said to him, "What if I make him drive an hour up here to waste his time?" Not long before, I had purchased something on OfferUp, and the Home Depot where we had met came to mind. I texted the guy and offered close to his full asking price for the wire. He was thrilled. He responded within seconds to every text. He sent me a message saying he was at the Home Depot, and at that point, I blocked his number. He then messaged my cousin to see if he was still interested. My cousin replied yes, but for a slightly lower price. The seller drove the wire to my house, unloaded it for my cousin, and left. My cousin was no longer sad. And that, folks, is how you execute petty revenge. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again.